we have any sign-ups on the comments? All right. The next agenda item is approval of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Do we have a new business now?
Okay. Our first item up is the audit of Metro Arts, and Bill Walker will be presenting that.
All right, well, good afternoon. It's nice to be with you today. Our office recently issued a report on the Metro Arts Commission. I want to recognize a couple people real quick. In the room, we've got Dr. Paulette Coleman, who is the interim director. She's been there for a few weeks. We've got Chris Affate. She is the finance manager. And we've got Commissioner Watts, and we appreciate them. Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate them being here with us today. We also want to recognize Sydney Davis. She was their grants manager. We talked to previous employees. They didn't have to talk to us. We appreciate that. And we also talked to some of their consultants. So, the reason we did this audit, if you'll remember back in December, there were multiple concerns about Metro Arts. Some of those concerns related to financial matters. Those concerns were brought before this committee. This committee voted unanimously to conduct an audit, for us to go out and do an audit. We did the audit, we've issued the report, and here we are. The audit basically looked at two specific areas. The first was the life cycle of your operating grants and your Thrive Awards. And there you're looking more at the nuts and bolts. So if you're an artist and you're submitting an application, you know, what controls do you have in place to make sure that applications are all being recorded, that they're being tracked properly, that they're being scored as intended, that they're not getting lost in the system, that the award amounts are as intended, payments are being made as intended, timely, correct amounts, and are they being monitored? So in other words, when we give money out, there's some way to make sure they're being spent in a way that is intended. I'm going to answer that question very quickly. I think as we go through the report, it'll make more sense. On this particular one, we had a scope limitation. You had a lot of turnover at Arts. You've also got a situation where your document retention is in material disarray. People did the best they could. They worked very hard. We worked very hard to try to get information, to try to validate assertions that were made. But we just could not get enough information to draw a conclusion. Now, we will go into that more here in a few minutes. The second thing we looked at were financial controls. So we looked at major financial transactions, and you have controls in place to make sure that those transactions conform to Metro rules and policies. The answer was no. There was intentional and pervasive circumvention of rules. So, and we'll go through that in just a second too. Now, as you go through the report, there are like 12 observations, 30 some odd recommendations. The tenor of this report, there's basically four themes. The first has to do with loss of institutional knowledge and succession planning and training needs improvement. The second one, well, I just said, the circumvention of rules, the intentional circumvention of rules. The third one is atypical transactions. That's where we saw some things that just didn't make any sense, and as we tried to get answers for them, we couldn't get satisfactory answers or documentation for it. And then the final one has to do with just technology. There's opportunities for technology improvements. Okay, so the first observation, we'll start with staff. It has to do with the training and the succession planning. And again, you've had a lot of turnover. And they took steps to try to be successful in the succession planning. For example, there was some overlapping where you had a person before they left, you brought a new person on board to be trained, but for whatever reason that training was not effective. Another issue that you have is you don't have written, well-established policies and procedures. Now, this is not the first department you've ever seen this with. However, in this particular case, this is a good example of why we need good policies and procedures, because most of the time when we do this observation, you got a 10-year process owner. They know the rules. They know how things work. In this particular case, it just shows how important those things are, but you didn't have anything to lean on. The biggest issue that you had is you have central departments such as human resources, finance, and legal, and they're part of their job is to support the other departments. They are staffed with professional staff members. They have deep institutional knowledge. They are subject matter experts in their field, okay? And there was limits placed on how much the employees could interact with those departments. That's an issue. That's a red flag to begin with. And then secondly, it's just not tenable. It's not wise. You know, if you're new and you're trying to figure things out, you want to lean on those departments instead of kind of having to reinvent the wheel. So the first observation has to do with the staff. The second observation has to do with the commission. Okay, so you got a 15-member commission. And when you look at the meetings and you go through the minutes, they are in.
Mr. Walker, can I inquire? This is a very extensive report with like multiple sections, and so I just wanted to understand, will you be presenting the entire thing and then we will go back through and pose
Absolutely.
questions? Or do you want us to pose questions after each section?
Well, you know, that's a very good point, because this is so long, you might forget your question. So,
That's what I'm like, I have a lot of notes and then I'm making more notes, so I didn't.
absolutely.
I'll defer to Chair. How many observations do we have by letter observation?
We've got 12, and I'll be giving you kind of like the Reader's Digest version of it.
Right.
So I'm not going to read it to you, but it's just kind of giving you a high-level summary. But it's whatever works best for you all, whatever you think would be most conducive to having meaningful conversation.
I would suggest that we have the questions as we go through the report.
Okay,
That way
I'd
they'll be
appreciate that.
relevant to the section of the report that he's working with at that
I'd
point in
appreciate
time.
that. Maybe, so may I pose a clarifying question on observation
Please,
A before we
absolutely.
go on to observation B? Okay. I think as it relates to the department not relying on the larger general central departments of finance, human resources, and law, I had some questions here, but then I heard you say, which I didn't see reflected here, limits by whom, right? Because as I was reading this, I was thinking perhaps from a training perspective, folks just genuinely did not understand that that was a resource to whom they could go. And when you have so much churn in a department, you can understand how that might be confusing. But when you say limits were placed, are you saying people in leadership specifically told members of staff that they were not to engage those departments?
That's an absolutely wonderful question, and thank you for
Okay.
asking that question.
Okay.
One of the challenges, and we had multiple challenges with this audit, one of the challenges was we could not speak directly to the previous director. So, and normally what we really want to do is we want to vet this with the director. We want to make sure what we're saying is correct. When we did interviews, there were multiple staff members who said they felt like their access to these departments was limited.
Okay. All right, so it was a feeling or a perception. There was no specific assertion that someone in leadership told them that they could not.
We didn't see anything, there wasn't like a smoking gun in terms of like an email or anything of
Okay.
that nature.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions on the first one?
So I just wanted to clarify, the director that you were just talking about is no longer with us.
Yes.
But who we do have here today is an interim director. She's just been with us a few weeks, so none of this was on her watch whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and same, I know Chair Watts is here and some others. These are folks that are new, they've been helpful to you in bringing around the audit. Okay, I wanted to make that clear because I'm so glad they're here. They've been very helpful to us. Likewise, when you said earlier, I just want to point out the documentation that you were able to look prior to their arrival. I think you described it as material disarray.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so hard to find books and records, hard to do much with it at the time. Okay, thank you for that.
And they were, I will say this, we did get people really trying to help us get that information, and we were trying to go through, like, we were going through their SharePoint. You don't want us going through your SharePoint. They're by nature inherently messy. If you went through my SharePoint, I would understand it, like Seth or Lauren would not understand it. So that was part of the challenge that we had within this audit. Okay, B, unless we're, any other questions?
Please.
Okay. B has to do with the commission. Now, when you go through their minutes and you're watching the meetings, they are in good faith trying to execute their duties. But there seems to be a lack of clarity on sometimes what their purpose is and what their duties are. And actually, Vice Mayor brought this up. I don't know if you remember this when we onboarded you. We didn't bring this up. You brought this up. How do we onboard boards and commissions? It's not unique here. You know, how can we make sure these boards and commissions are successful? One of the problems you had here is that the commission seems like they were put in a position they weren't built for. So you've got governance and you've got management. Those are two distinct functions. It can get blurry, but those are two very distinct functions. So for example, for your commission here, you've got an arts commission that has a very broad mission. There's a lot of different ways you can carry out that mission. So part of what they do is they kind of give you a direction on where you want to go. You've got your management, they're the arms and the feet. They carry out the will of the commission, okay? And then you got directors, kind of your bridge. Well, you have all this turnover on your commission, and then you start having all these issues. And there's noise with these issues, and there's emotional fervor with these issues. And so in good faith, you're trying to resolve these issues, but you're starting to get into this world you're not built for. You know, your management's going to be the ones, your staff are going to be the ones who are, you know, they're doing the applications, they're doing processing the payments, things of that nature. That's not a commission job. And like we were saying earlier, the staff trying to help the best they can, but they're not really, based on the training and succession planning, are not really built to provide the support that they need. So you're kind of in this netherworld that they're not built for. The second thing has to do with your bylaws. That's something you really want to go through, get to know those things, scrub those things, periodically review them. What do you need? What do you not need? Put in there, what do you want? What kind of information do you want from your management? That's going to be fluid. But for example, you may want an aging report. You know, we send out so many grants. You know, let's say there's 100 grants we're supposed to send out. We've sent out 75, you know, within a month. This is when we expect to get the rest of them out. Are there any bottlenecks? Whatever it may be, you know, whatever the commission wants. But that's something you want to go through and, you know, try to figure out what information is important. Then getting to the onboarding process, and this is what the Vice Mayor brought up in ours. There's kind of a lot of discussion on this, what's the best way to do it. Our view is it's kind of a team effort, but the core of that's going to be the management. Legal has a place at the table. They play an important piece. You know, Teresa's been with us for a long time. She does a wonderful job. We love Teresa. Part of her job is to keep you all out of unintentional trouble. But she's not in our office day to day. If we're having a problem meeting standards or, you know, we're having training issues, you know, she's not there every day. That's what we do. So, you know, you really want to get a director or management to come up with a really good onboarding program with legal at the table. Because legal does need to be there because, again, you've got like open records laws. You've got open meetings laws. And you want to make sure those things aren't being violated. So there just needs to be try to generate a more robust, effective onboarding process.
Can I ask then fundamentally, whom is that incumbent on? Right, like, I mean, in any particular department with a commission or not, are you saying it is the management, it's incumbent on the management of the department to train the commission that has oversight of them and hire, fire for them, right? So as to, you know, this is how this department works, this is how we do our work, whatever, you know, whatever's being kind of conveyed out to the commission for their understanding about how the department operates, absolutely understood in a general sense. But as far as kind of, you know, oversight, governance, best practice, Robert's rules, how to conduct meetings, how to update your bylaws, that seems generally to be something that could touch any and every board and commission, right? And so I do think, when I think about it as kind of tiered, right? I mean, there are things that we need to render for all our boards and commissions that are kind of unified, and then I kind of think of it as like two-tiered training, right? There's the general training for service on a Metro board and commission, and then there's sort of a subsequent tailored training that's particular to the governing documents and so forth. But as far as making sure that each board and commission has that and they have the targeted training, I know there is an effort now that I appreciate coordinated out of the mayor's office. We have a council office representative. Our for council is represented by, I think, Councilwoman Sepulveda, who is chair of our rules committee. So I think there's an effort now kind of afoot in leadership in Metro, given some of these challenges, to engage that space. But I would say it would likewise be important for this department and commission to understand, and any department and commission to understand, like, who's signing off on that, who's making sure it's done, who's making sure it's implemented. And I think that's sometimes where Metro gets crosswise, because it's kind of like fundamentally whose responsibility is it? And people genuinely, oh, I thought that was legal's responsibility. Oh, I thought that was the director's responsibility. Oh, I thought that was a commission chair's responsibility, because it's not explicit, right? So I guess my question would be both for arts and then more generally, on whom is it incumbent that that training be like formulated and done?
Well, it's a fascinating topic. No, it really is, and
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
one you're gonna have an easy solution to. One thing you have to remember with Metro is huge.
Yeah.
And it's very fragmented. It's not like you have a company, a CEO that can push things down through, you've got the mayor's offices, they can kind of push things down. But then you've got all these boards and commissions, they're on their own, and you got elected officials, that's a totally another different bucket. So who does this training? And you make up a good point, and it's a bigger issue than just arts. We can speak just to arts, but, because your question, if I hear you correctly, is, we're saying it's a team effort. Management needs to be the one that drives it because they know more what's going on a day-to-day basis. Your point, if I hear you correctly, is, well, how do you know if management doesn't do it correctly, who's going to catch that? What's the control to catch that?
Correct.
That's a wonderful question. I wish I had a better answer for you. But I think that's something as Metro goes through this, they're trying to work through to figure out how to solve that issue.
And
That makes sense.
Isn't there also an inherent conflict of interest, for lack of a better word, to have management tell the commission, here's how you're supposed to oversee me?
Yes.
Well, does management mean just the director, or does it mean the staff?
Yeah, I think it could include
Because
either or.
I don't know that the commission oversees the staff, they only oversee the director.
I don't want to belabor this because I actually find this to be the least concerning observation. But in a different way, like, what do you mean when you say they blurred the lines between governance and management? Like, what were the examples of commission members either getting in the business of management or management getting in the business? Like, tell me a little more about.
Well, I think, first, generally, I think it's not uncommon to see governance and management blur. I think sometimes that can be confusing. And I think in this place, and maybe when I say that, the better way to put it is, there's this perception, because if you're the public and you've got an issue with whatever's going on at ours, your first contact is probably going to be the commission. You know what I'm saying? But they're not built to answer some of the questions. Well, usually what would happen is the complaints go to the commission, and then the commission's going to work with the management to figure out what's going on and fix it. In this particular case, you kind of had a perfect storm of a lot of turnover in all these different places. Document retention needs improvement. So it's just very difficult to kind of get your hands on if I'm a commissioner and I'm trying to figure this out, that's a very difficult task. And your staff's doing the best they can to help and support, but again, they're not built at this point to help either. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Other questions?
Okay. The next, if we could, I'm going to talk about the next three and then open up, because they're kind of all related. And when we were doing this report, it was one of our challenges was how do you communicate some of this? Because there's different ways. You want to be effective in how you're communicating. You want to make sure your main points, but you don't want to lose people. The next three have to do with the use of temporary employees. And the way that works is, let's say you're a department and you've got an employee, they're a critical employee, you need them there every day, but they get sick, and they're gonna be out for 6 months. Well, we're not gonna, get rid of them. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go to a temp agency, if you can't handle it internally, if you can't get anybody to take that place. What your temp agency's gonna do, they've already gone through, they've recruited people, they have interviewed people, they've hired them, they've set the rates, and then what we would do is just say, hey, we need employee whatever, and then they would send it to you. In this particular case, what you had was Metro Arts was doing the recruiting, they were doing the hiring, they were setting the rates, they were giving raises, they were giving leave time. So in essence, it wasn't really in substance. In form, they were called temporary employees. In substance, they were really being treated more like regular employees. Now, this is one, it's important to note, we have civil service rules, we have civil service policies. Those were not developed overnight. Those are things that have been developed really decades. You got Civil Service Commission, and what you have is multiple stakeholders. You know, you've got management, employees, unions, different people, and what they're trying to do, in this particular case, you're trying to come up with good hiring practices, good employment practices, but you're also trying to be transparent, you're trying to also balance, sometimes your values are at tension with one another, so you want to be a good employer, but you also want to, you got to be good stewards of the public money. So those are tensions. There's a lot of work that goes into these civil service rules and policies. And the way it was done, it was basically a bypass. So, and I think that needs to be underscored because there's a lot of risk with that. We want to make sure that we're hiring people that are qualified. We want to make sure that we're not underpaying or overpaying folks. We want to make sure, you know, that they're getting good benefits, but not excessive benefits. There's all kinds of risk associated with this. You've got people who, and we didn't see any abuse. I want to make that very clear. When we were looking how the temporary employees were treated, we didn't see anything that would be amiss. We didn't really look at it, but there's nothing to suggest that they were mistreated. But that environment, that control environment, in that situation, you could easily have bad things happening, discrimination happening, whatever it may be, and the remedies are going to be a lot more difficult. I mean, you can always go get an attorney, but that's a lot more challenging than just being able to go through our HR department. The next thing associated with temporary employees has to do with overtime. So you had 10 employees, they were paid a little over $600,000. About 106, I believe, was overtime. Some of the transactions, we talk about those atypical transactions, you had one person, 274 hours within one payroll period. And your payroll period is like 80 hours, so it's a 2-week period. Then you had 3 or 4 folks, I can't remember the exact number, but it was between like 60 to 75 hours of overtime within that time period. And when you ask for, okay, well, what were they doing? What was the scope of work? We really couldn't get satisfactory answers on that. And then finally on this one, you know, you do have civil service rules. If you're going to use temporary employees, we've got 3 contracts that we found that you could use. There are limits, like how long they can be temporary employees. There were 3 of them that exceeded that. And then we've got 3 contracts, but they used a contract. And this contractor didn't really get paid a whole lot of money for this. It's not like they've, you know, but they're basically a payroll processing service for seasonal employees. And the contract's very explicit that you're not for temporary employees. So it didn't really even meet the contract sort of thing. But go ahead, please.
Well, okay, so that's where I really wanted to focus in on the Goodson contract in particular. Did you looked at that contract? Did that contractor have any duties to Metro to report if, you know, they have a temporary contract that goes on for a certain number of days, if it exceeds, you know, what that contract is actually for? Because it seems to clearly exceed it in all 3 of your observations.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I don't know that we answered that question or looked at that question. It's a great question. I would say that the contract, the services that were being provided did not fall under the scope of that contract, if that makes sense. Now, and go ahead.
Well, and I concur with your question right there, and I think that that's an important thing for us to look at too, because of kind of like scope creep and like what is the duty of Goodson as somebody contracted to Metro government to just say at some point like, hey, we don't do this for y'all.
Right.
Like this is not in our contract, right?
Right.
So.
And it's kind of the same thing. We'll talk about the split purchases here in a minute, but basically, you got contractors. Well, they tell us to send in something under $25,000, which you're trying to split it. And on the one hand, contracts are different than knowing our procurement rules. You know what I'm saying? I think expecting our vendors to understand every procurement rule, because there are procurement rules. There's a purpose for them, obviously, but there's a lot of them. Your contract's your contract. That's something you've agreed upon. You'd expect there to be more knowledge about what's in a contract when you're servicing somebody and whatnot. So,
Do you have a sense of how many other Metro commissions or agencies might use Goodson?
we looked at that some. I know that parks use them, I believe, for.
There's it's a lot of, it's seasonal and it's interns. So there's actually, even Metro Arts used them for interns prior to this. So I would say a number of departments use them. I want to say, probably at least 10 or more. Because it's just for those summer interns, or like Metro Action Commission, I believe their summer program with youth, they utilize it. So there are other departments that utilize it correctly, and even Metro Arts used to use it correctly as well.
I want to make sure that I understand. You said that one of your temporary employees that you tested, did they work 278 hours over the 80 or including the 80?
Well, no, that's what we said, it was just straight 278 hours, there's no overtime with that. It's really an odd, like I said, there's a lot, again, these are atypical transactions that when you try to get information, we couldn't get satisfactory answers on.
Because that's,
So,
it's 20 plus hours a day, every day. That doesn't get flagged in the system that was in place. That didn't get flagged in any way.
no. And we'll talk a little bit more about their
Okay.
payroll and their timekeeping, because there's issues there too,
Okay.
which was what they were using, when we talk about their timekeeping, that's what they were using with their temp agencies too, to kind of keep up with people's hours and whatnot. But there were issues with that too.
Where was the responsibility for that? With Goodson or with the Arts Commission?
Well, Goodson,
Management?
I would think, and correct me if anybody disagrees with this, I would think that's more on Arts, because Goodson's just like, hey, we're processing your payroll, you tell us to pay this number of hours. So you might have been, possibly, if I'm at Goodson, I might be, well, this doesn't look right, did somebody key something wrong or whatnot, but, you know, again, when we talk to, Goodson's not gonna be able to answer the question, what was this person doing for 278 hours?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we weren't able to get the answer when we asked that question to Arts.
And for invoice review, so if the department would be the one to do that invoice, and, I mean, even if we get invoices from contractors, we're gonna look at the hours to make sure that they're reasonable. And so it would be incumbent on Arts, whoever is paying that invoice or reviewing that invoice, would be the one to look at it and flag it. But if they are aware of the situation, then they're not going to flag it.
I guess I agree that they wouldn't maybe question, you know, you're gonna submit whatever you're supposed to pay out that week and however many hours it was, and then Goodson's gonna pay that. I guess my question is more aimed at, though, knowing that you are a Metro contractor for seasonal and interns, somebody who stays on the payroll for 630 days should raise some flags.
Right.
No, I disagree with that.
And there was some turnover in ownership too of Goodson.
Their names changed.
Their names changed a couple of times. Not that that's an excuse to not follow your own contract, but there may have been misunderstanding as well with that.
Well, I guess this also goes back to kind of a process question when, whether by contract or otherwise, like, right, something that is very obviously on its face, right? Like you were contracted to Metro for summer and seasonal and interns, and you've got, you know, X hundred of hours over a year. I think what I'm always interested to understand is, in addition to, you know, what we say to our departments and what they need to do by way of internal controls, I think I'm often wanting to make sure that people that contract with us likewise, and kind of where does that live, right? And so I have been concerned in the past that contractors, you know, whether through billing or otherwise, you know, if they're not comporting themselves correctly and to best practices, it did not and does not register in our procurement process. When we go back to contract, it's sort of like they don't get dinged, right? In fact, they just get re-upped because they've worked with Metro government for X number of years, and like that's the only factor. Meanwhile, we have an audit where, again, I'm not impugning them particularly, but right, like it just, where does that register? That kind of like, okay, well, next time that comes around, might we want to inquire with them, how did you miss that? Why did you see that as your obligation? Like, I do want to make sure, right, like we're looking at a department, but often, sometimes where Metro really gets sideways is how they work with people who are contracted to Metro government. And that is where we see not a fair amount, but we have seen some malfeasance, right? Because maybe we don't have good internal controls, there's scope creep, and then we don't necessarily, like we fix our internal controls, but then how do we make sure with that contractor? So, I mean, I concur, like, I feel like Goodson had some obligation here to kind of be like, hey, this doesn't look right, so. for what that's worth.
Wonderful points, all of them. The one challenge we have to get there is, it is Metro, again, being big. It's gonna be, each department, the quality's gonna be a little bit, is different. So it's gonna be that training and then, you know, to every department, making sure people understand that if you have a contract, these are the things that you need to be constantly monitoring.
I also think it goes to procurement. All due respect, it's just like, if, Mr. Crumbo, as far as, the office that manages our procurement and somebody manages that, like making sure that when this comes through in an audit, it gets registered, associated to that contractor, and when it comes up again, that we're going to put that out to procurement for these contracted services, right, that we are either formalizing that into how we write the procurements, what our expectation is, like that kind of stuff. Like, I just want to make sure that all our good, diligent processes are communicating with each other, right, on that
I mean,
kind
the system is working fine,
Yeah.
right? We started flagging these things at the beginning of this fiscal year. A few months go by, we're trying to solve these issues with ARTS. We're not getting a response. In fact, we're getting adversity out of it. We refer it to this committee. They do the work. It's back to us. This will go back in the cycle, and it absolutely will be part of the evaluation as we go. And I can see the same thing, but several other things we've talked about here. Have there been flags? Yes. Were they circumvented by ARTS? Yes. When they got to us, did we start to handle them and manage them? Yes. So I can assure you, when the flags are raised, we're working through those.
right, and making sure that's addressed through that procurement piece, even though that's, okay.
He's going to talk a lot more here. It's difficult for finance, law, HR, others to manage. I think you put it here, material disarray of the records, intentional and pervasive circumvention of our policies and procedures, employees being directed not to talk to the big departments. I mean, this is a management mess, right? And the flags are raised, and they absolutely will get resolved. In fact, a lot of them have been resolved already.
Okay, great.
A general question, Bill. You've mentioned several times some of the challenges to get information. Do you feel like that there was a intentional lack of cooperation?
Not the staff we worked with at ARTS did the best they could. Like I said, we did too. We were going through stuff, trying to dig through stuff. Now, I will say, and you asked a great question at another audit committee meeting about, like, okay, somebody doesn't have documentation, what does that mean? It kind of depends on the situation. Like, there's one like payroll, we couldn't find documentation on payroll. That's actually a big deal, because that's such a fundamental process. Like, how do you pay your people if you don't have documentation? How do you know the withdrawals are correct? That's actually more puzzling. In this particular instance, I don't think anything, at least with the current staff that we have and the people we were dealing with, I think they were trying, we just couldn't get it.
Yeah, I want to draw this distinction, because I think the question you're asking may be a little different. The current staff that we have, the interim director, they've been terrific to work with. They're trying to help resolve these. It's folks that are no longer with us that we've been incredibly challenged with. And the training, the turnover.
Mr. Crumba, I apologize. I think some members of our audience cannot hear you, so we've got the recording, but also would you project your voice a little bit more so that everybody can hear you?
Sure. I was just drawing the distinction here, really, that when we're talking about the cooperation with the audit, once you were there, was great with the folks that are here today and that are working with you. It's part of that where we were challenged and really led to the referral here. So, and I can tell you, our department's been just delighted with the interim director, Chair Watts. I see Chris back there and some of the staff. They've been terrific to work with trying to get this sorted out. But prior to that has been the biggest challenge, where the cooperation just hasn't been there, and the circumvention and the other things were mentioned here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on? Okay. Let's talk about grants. Okay. Because this kind of ties into the documentation piece. Okay, so you got two different types of grants. You got the operating grants, and you got the Thrive Rewards. And when we talk to people, some of the processes actually sound pretty good. Like, they're scoring. They're very thoughtful in trying to score the applicants into the will of what they're trying to accomplish.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Have we addressed observation F before we go into G? Circumventing procurement code.
Is that the split purchases? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Let's talk about that. Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking that D, E, and F kind of went together, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's the split purchases that you had, I think, 12 different purchase orders. The average was like 24, right under 24, 25,000. And the way it works, some of y'all probably know this. I apologize if I'm saying stuff you already know, but the magic number is 25,000. The more, if you go purchase something, the more it's going to cost, the more scrutiny you need to put under it. Again, that magic number is 25,000. If it's under 25,000, it's far less stringent. But you go above 25,000, you've got to have, it's more like an RFP or something like that, where you got teams of people looking at things. And so if it comes right under that 25,000, you don't have the same scrutiny. Now, what we were told was, well, we've got different scopes of work, but then when you look at the scopes of work, they're very vague. So, you know what I'm saying? So it's just kind of like, and the fact that it was right under the amount, and they basically admitted they were trying to split the purchases. So it was, and that again goes against our procurement code.
When you say they admitted, who
We
is?
had staff telling us, previous staff telling us that they would,
As well as consultants.
Previous
Some of
staff?
these consultants.
And consultants, okay.
well, thank you, I told us about that.
Yeah, and I'll provide a little clarification about this. So we've had procurement rules for a long time, right, that are in place so that we have a large centralized procurement system, but we do have these 70 or 80 boards, commissions, departments, and so forth. So trying to give them some day-to-day autonomy, if nothing else, just to speed up the pace by which we do business is really important. So $25,000 has been the delegated purchasing authority. And so unless we have reason to believe the department or commission is trying to circumvent the rules like we've seen here or something, we let them operate. And it works really, really well most of the time. Here, what we have in split purchasing is saying, well, we've got a department that wants to spend a lot more money on one thing, however defined. And so instead of saying, well, we're going to procure that now and have to go through a bigger, lengthier process, we're just going to split this and come in just a hair under where we are here, which just circumvents the rules, and it's very difficult for us to detect. And so if we spend all of our time every day going out auditing every one of those, we might as well just have central procurement to begin with. So this has been a very frustrating point for us as we've looked at this, and it's, again, very difficult for us to police without putting a whole lot of people on the field all the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we ready for grants? Okay, great. Grants, the central theme is the lack of documentation. Like I said, we talked to people and they would tell you the process. And again, like the scoring, that sounded like they were thoughtful. They were really training these scoring panelists to try to make sure that the will of the commission was being executed. But when it came to the documentation, it was very difficult. Kind of an example of how we were trying to pivot. What you really want to have is the applications. You want an application listing. So every application that was submitted, but we couldn't get that. So we started with payments. So, and what you did, you took a sample of payments and you went back. Now the problem with that is if something got lost, didn't get processed, you turn in an application and just got sat around, you're not going to catch that, obviously. But we were thinking, okay, at least you got to do something. So you got a payment, you go back and you kind of get a feel if it's working the way it's intended. Then later on in the audit, we were able to get the application listing for the 24 Thrive Awards. We couldn't get it from anything else. So it's just, again, trying to pivot around, trying to get the documentation. But what we did find, some of your operating grants are different than Thrive in the sense that you have to have a grant agreement for example. And so the sample size was 47, and there were several, I can't remember, but there were several that we could not find a contract for. There were several where the payments were done prior to, or the payments were made after there was a duly executed agreement. The biggest issues, monitoring is one of them. It's real important if you get money that you can tell that the money was spent as intended. What they do is they've got these reports that come in, and they're closeout reports, and there's variance on how the quality of them. Some of them were really good in terms of telling you what they did. Some of them were not so good. Either way, there's no way verifying it. It's because it's self-reported. You really need somebody going out there monitoring, looking at those numbers that's been reported to make sure that what they said they did with it. The other thing had to do with declined applications within that Thrive for that 24. We just couldn't tell what it was for. It was very difficult. Somebody's going to have to decline some of them at some point. We're not saying that. That's management's prerogative. But you want to be able to back up why you're declining something. And then the final thing had to do with the scoring panelists, they paid them. And that's an equity thing. It's kind of like, well, some people can't afford to be on these panels, so we're gonna pay them, that's great. But we couldn't get documentation for it. They paid about 63,000 out during our scope period. 10,000, we only got documentation for 10,000. There really wasn't any rhyme or reasons on why people were being paid the amounts they were being paid. So it goes back to, you can pay them, but just make sure you've got a very methodical, systematic way that's well documented on why they're being paid.
Yeah, if I may, let me clarify here, because these words get to be very important. So when we talk about a grant, right, we see grants a lot of places in the metro government, and I'm seeing some shaking heads down there that our council people will be very familiar with those. And grants, in this case, we're allowed to make to organizations by law, and there's a contract required. It's a fairly standard contract, and that flows through easily. And to Bill's point earlier, those are usually quite traceable. There were some issues here. An award, in this case, has been termed, is not that. Awards have come around for the purposes for organizations and in some cases individuals, which is really a procurement. It's a way for us to purchase a good or a service or some sort of community good that's out there. So when you hear grants and awards, those are two different things. The grants, in this case, and I should stop and say, finance, law, others, we have nothing to do with setting the grants and who receives those and so forth. I know law and others obviously make sure that they're legal, and we certainly make sure that there's money there to pay them. But in terms of the selection process and all, that's the job of the Arts Commission, Arts Management staff. Once we have the contracts, though, we do need to administer those like we would anything else in the metro government. So grants here, awards are purchasing here, and I think as he's going to talk about in a moment, trying to track down the actual exchange of value here, the documentation that led up to them, how they were paid and so forth. It's pretty scarce, and it's been very difficult for us to track.
Can I ask if that, so in observation N, right, about the Thrive Award classification, to what extent, so it says, through the code in 2001, so to your point, Director Crumbo, about, grants and given to organizations, and then in 2014, Metro Arts obtained permission for the procurement agent to allow individual artists to be treated as, and so I think that's an interesting point there, and I mean, we could pick it up in observation N, but I think there's sort of how it is, but then how it was done in practice. And, at the time, it was, T's were crossed and I's were dotted and people asked permission, but again, it seems to kind of have eroded over time, and so basically people's understanding diverged from kind of fundamentally what was the requirement.
Yeah, so, you're reaching back almost a decade, long
Right.
before my time. So
Yeah, 2014.
So let me tell you what I've learned about it, which may not be all there is to know about it. But at that period of time, we were starting to look at individual artists, right, who can't be part of grants because those need to go to organizations, established organizations under the law. So there was an arrangement that said, hey, we might be able to purchase a good or a service or some sort of community goodness here. And they started with some small amounts, and it sounds like they were trying a few things and it was working within the rules. Many years later, though, we start to see what's in this report. We're starting to circumvent the rules. All of a sudden, the numbers are getting much, much larger, and it does start to collect these flags that we're talking about here. It gets a closer review. 10 years ago, I wasn't here. I don't think any of us were at the time, so I can't really speak to exactly what happened. But for folks that are closest to it, my understanding is that's been the trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, appreciate that. Sorry, that was a bit of a skip ahead, but it seemed related, so apologies.
Next, we'll talk about lead time, because there's some issues here. The way it works, R12 is our accounting system of record. Okay, that's where everything's located. It's real important that stuff's in there. Ours, and we do the same thing. When it comes to leave time, they have another system where you're supposed to be like requesting time off, approving time off, keeping it recorded and whatnot. And what you do at the end of the payroll period, if you don't have any leave time, basically R12, this is oversimplistic, but basically it's just going to record everything as regular pay. But what you want to do for transparency reasons and accountability reasons, you want to transfer how much vacation time are people taking, what's the sick time that people are taking. Okay. One thing we noticed, we tried to reconcile what was in, it's called Honeybee, that's what they use. Honeybee to the R12 system, there was a lot of time taken in Honeybee that was not recorded in R12. Now, there's a couple different leave types that we need to talk about. You've got vacation, which is self-explanatory. You've got sick time, which is self-explanatory. Comp time is like, okay, if I work 4 hours over on Tuesday, I can take, depending on what your position is, 4 hours or time and a half on Friday, I can take that time off. You have admin with leave. What that is, a director has within their discretion the ability to give any employee 40 hours of leave time outside of the sick time and the vacation time, but it's supposed to only be used when those types are not appropriate. And my experience at Metro has always been, it's like, okay, you got a new employee, they get the flu, and they got 2 days. Well, instead of them coming, and they need to be off for a week, instead of having them come in and spread sickness around, take your 2 days and we'll give you 3 days off. In this particular case, there's just a lot of that leave taken. I think it was like 800 hours or so of that was taken. Probably the most peculiar was there's this leave time called executive director leave pay. That is not in our civil service rules. And again, keep in mind, we have these civil service rules for a reason. Metro tries to be, yes,
And
ma'am.
just to clarify, the executive director is not a civil servant, but do civil service rules still apply?
Not to him, but to his employees, they
Gotcha.
do. Now, basically what happened, when you go to Honeybee, you have this executive director leave. Again, it's not in R12 because it doesn't exist. It's not in. And when we looked at it, it's basically looked like just extra leave time to be given. So let's say there's a holiday. If July 4th is on a Wednesday, take Monday and Tuesday off without using your leave balances. So what ends up happening is when you do the numbers, there was like 2,000 or so hours that were not recorded in leave time that was taken in the Honeybee system that was never in the R12 system. And that includes, like, some of that's just like your regular vacation time, sick time, just didn't get over there. And then some of it was the 900 hours of executive director leave pay. Within our scope, that's how much time was given within the Honeybee system. And then you add the admin with leave pay, that ended up being about 1,700 hours.
And there are how many employees in the Arts Commission?
Well,
15.
that's their number. Now, they've been, there's some fluctuation in terms
I
of.
guess they've funded 15 positions.
Yeah, could you clarify what R12 versus Honeybee is? I know those are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and also is Honeybee like a Metro-wide HR approved?
That's something they've gone out
Oh.
and they've.
How do we even let that happen, right? Okay, right, okay, go ahead.
Well, now technically, we need to probably get our hands slapped. We use something similar, like it's just something that's easy for us to kind of internally go through and keep up with people's time and whatnot. But in this particular case, what R12 is, that's our accounting system of records. That's like the Bible. That's got to be
Oracle
tight.
kinda thing.
Yeah,
But we have control over, finance has control.
Okay.
And again, you want these balances to jive because it goes back to transparency and accountability. You can kind of see, how, like you would never be able to do executive director leave in R12 because these codes are set up by our payroll division. Part of this is you've got part of our controlled environment, like human resources. They monitor the hiring process. So they're going to make sure, they're going to look at the applicants that come in. They're going to make sure that they meet minimum qualifications, that the pay that is paid to an employee once they're hired meets this range and whatnot. And then they put all that into our R12 system. Payroll can't do anything until HR puts something in there. So you've got all these balances, checks and balances, but that were really bypassed. Again, the circumvention of our rules. But basically what happened, you had this system, and this is where they were, if I needed to take time off, if I was a Metro Arts employee, this is the system that would be recorded. Now, one thing we had a hard time with is, it sounds like what they would do, like, what you'd want to do is, I'm sick, so I'm going to call my boss and say, hey, I need to take a day off. Some form of communication, email, or we can do it through our system. And then they approve it, and then when you do your payroll, somebody is reconciling that amount that's what's going to, you have to send information to our payroll division. There's a report that has to go to our payroll division every payroll cycle. Okay, so somebody should be reconciling that. But in this case, it seems like it was verbal. Hey, I'm going to take this day off, and then they would just put it on their timesheet. which that's problematic because people can forget things. You know what I'm saying? Like if Monday I'm sick, I'm taking Monday off, but my payroll doesn't end for another 2 weeks, very easy, my supervisor's gonna forget. So that's problematic. But the problem is, all this time is being taken off in the honeybee system. So I'm sick, or I'm sick, let's just say I'm sick for a week. I got 40 hours sitting in honeybee. Some of that time didn't make it over to R12. Does that make sense? You look
So
at
did
those.
they get paid?
Oh, yeah, they're getting paid. What happens is, okay, R12 is gonna pay you regardless. If we didn't record if I take like 40 hours of vacation and we don't send it to R12 is gonna pay me regardless. The problem is R12 is gonna show that I got paid regular pay. What you wanna show is that I got paid 40 hours of vacation. Does that make sense? It goes back to transparency and being accountable and knowing what people are being paid, what categories they're being paid for.
So is it just up to every department and whoever their, staff fiscal officer is, use Honeybee, don't use Honeybee, use this other tool, I found this thing online, this is how I personally choose to manage this, and it's my responsibility to reconcile it to R12? Or do we have, I would hope that an institution like Metro would say, hey, we need something that interfaces, and so if Oracle doesn't have a specific product or solution to book leave time and vacation pay, which seems weird that there's not a preferred solution, that's just all kinds of potentially messed up. I just, what? I don't see that necessarily reflected here, should we be using this honeybee thing and/or, get a preferred, right? Because for consistency and accountability and checks and balances, if everybody in Metro, this is our approved thing, how we book vacation and leave time, then everybody knows we're doing it the right way, instead of then y'all have to get up in here and be like, well, what's this thing? And maybe you had a familiarity with honeybee, but
Let's don't overcomplicate this, right? The Metro government uses the Oracle R12 system, and it's fantastic.
yeah.
It works like a traditional payroll system. It has vacation, it has leave time, and we expect that our departments, our commissions, and so forth will enter that information correctly, however they came about it. If they have a spreadsheet, a honeybee, or whatever they would like to use out there, that's okay, but by the time it gets to us, we expect it to be correct and compliant with the law.
Right.
What Bill is saying is that's not what happened here.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, basically you have a lot of time sitting in honeybee that's not in R12. So what R12 is gonna show you is regular pay, where honeybee is gonna show you vacation, sick, comp time, executive director leave, admin pay. That really wasn't, people really weren't working. Again, you're gonna get paid because Metro they give you these leave time, but they get their limits on that leave time. Again, it's that our values are we want to be a good employer, but we need to be good stewards of the public funds. So the problem is our system of record that anybody can go in at Metro and look at, like finance can go in and look at, we can go in and look at, anybody can go in to monitor it. That was not in play because it was not entered into the system.
Okay, so
Bill,
just,
I'm sorry.
and I apologize, so
Go ahead.
just to clarify, so internal to that department, to Mr. Crumbo's point, the finance manager or the person who's managing all this, they could put in a spreadsheet, I can create my own spreadsheet to manage that, and so fundamentally, it's incumbent on the person who has the duty to put it into R12, that they are putting it in there accurately, and so we allow, and maybe that's fine, manage it how you want to internal to your department, but what fundamentally is accountable is how you put it in R12.
Yes, and again,
Okay.
not to overcomplicate, there are 3 elements we're looking for what's called delegated accounting. That by the time it gets to us, it better be complete, it better be accurate, and it better be on time. If you're missing any of those 3 elements, it's wrong,
Okay,
right? That's what we have here,
got it.
pervasively circumventing the system.
Bill, would it be an oversimplification to say that you had employees who were granted time off, paid for it, and the system said they were working?
I would say that there were leave balances that were not allowed under civil service rules. And so, basically, yes. I mean, basically what you got there is you got leave balances that are not allowed. The system, if you're looking at it from an accountability standpoint and a transparency standpoint, I'm gonna go look into the R12 system, and it's saying that, and I'm just using this as an example, you got 80 hours in the payroll period, that for, 80 hours, somebody was actually doing work at Metro, contributing to the good of Metro, whatever that might be. Whereas in reality, it could have been that 32 hours, somebody was sick. And that's okay, you can take the 32 hours off, but it's not being recorded within the R12 system for sick. Now, for the executive director leave, that's just free time. See what I'm saying? You've basically given your employees leave time that they're not allowed to take that's in excess of our civil service rules and policies, which are again in place to, again, balance that being a good employer versus being good stewards of public funds.
So that executive time that apparently is discretionary, is that allowable? Okay,
No, that's the
that's what,
problem.
okay, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's the problem. It's not, the other ones that we mentioned, like the vacation, the sick, the comp time, the admin with leave, those, within certain rules and certain parameters, those are allowed by civil service rules. There's rules around those, but those are allowed. The executive director leave was created to give extra time off. It's not allowed.
Not
within-
allowable, okay.
Got it.
The only other thing with payroll real quick is comp time. You know, comp time, we just talked about that. That's where, okay, I work 5 hours over one day. Instead of getting paid for it, I'm just gonna get extra time off later. The way civil service works, the ability to take that is based on your position. And how much time you get is based on your position. So for some people, you get time and a half. For other people, it's just straight time. And then for others, if you're at a high enough level, you don't get any. It's just part of your job. So there were people that were not eligible to get the comp time that were taking comp time. And again, getting back into kind of how messy things were, when you go into R12, it'll tell you like what's accrued, but the accrued amounts were lower than the amounts that were taken. So it's almost like, again, it goes back to the integrity of the data. It's just not there because, you know what I'm saying? Like if you got 40 hours over here in comp time, but you only were accruing like 5, and obviously you're not putting in the amounts that were accrued correctly.
I guess, can I ask too, like often I see in here, Metro Arts circumvented, Metro Arts, whatever. And so we're not attributing this to a particular individual, but, as we look at more of this, I mean, did somebody previously in the position of being the financial administrator in this office, this looks like kind of extreme dereliction of duty and borderline malfeasance. And so, that's like a former person who used to work in that department. I don't know what best practice is. You don't name a certain individual, but it seems odd that we don't necessarily name the position, right? Because we say Metro Arts, but, at the time, I'm sure there were plenty of other people working there who didn't, knowingly know about this or have anything to do with it. And so I do want to understand just from an audit perspective, again, I'm not sure what best practice is, whether, maybe not naming somebody individually, but I feel like so often here we're like Metro Arts did this. That's a cohort of 15 people, but clearly somebody who was charged with this, was doing the wrong thing for an extended period of time. So can you speak to
Yes,
that?
and there was a few reasons that we wrote it like that. One was there was a lot of finger pointing, and there's not any documentation underneath it for us to determine who did it. We
Okay.
did talk to some former employees. We were not able to talk to the former director. And so without hearing all sides and having something underlying it that shows directly who did what, we don't want to name a single person.
I
It would
appreciate
be
that.
somebody in management, yes, that had the authority to do that, but we couldn't determine who it was.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Okay. The next thing, and we only got 2 more buckets, has to do with the technology. So this is pretty straightforward. They use something called Submittable to track your applications and things like that. And it's very siloed. If you want to go look at an application and you want to go, you can kind of see what's going on with it. But you have a lot of people with admin rights, which means they can change things. Now, if I want to go in and look at a specific application, I can see the changes. Anybody wants to change a score, for example, that's important. Your scores need to be pretty solid. They need to be like Fort Knox. you'd have to go into the application to see any changes that were made. What would be more ideal is if I could run a system-wide exception report that would tell me, these are the changes that were made in scoring to a specific application. Is that somebody that has the authority to do that? What were the reasons behind it? Another thing that would be good is if you have like a queuing system, those are always good, because it's like you're in an application and you're sitting there and it's assigned to somebody, and you know, if it doesn't get worked, a manager can go through and do a review and say, okay, why do we still have these in the queue that should have been worked, 2 weeks ago or whatever. So, they have a really good grants manager. She seems really sharp in terms of just trying to, at least understanding what a process should be. I think she's got some ideas too on different systems, but that's something you definitely want to explore. And then finally, I think we just talked about this a minute ago, getting back to what should you classify the Thrive Awards? And this can be another fascinating conversation in the sense that, a procurement, you got grants and procurements, those are two different things. And I know you did a great job explaining this, but sometimes it really depends on what are you doing. Like, usually when a procurement, you retain ownership. We own it. And we have more control over what we want. Grants are more broad. And so there are people that are looking into this, and it's already been mentioned, but you got a code, you got a resolution. Things have to go to organizations. They can't go to individuals. So you need to somehow or another work with the various stakeholders. What do you want to do with this? If you're going to make it a grant, it needs to be a grant. You need to work within the system to make it a grant. If it's going to be a procurement, you're really going to have to change some of the things in terms of it's going to be far more contracts, far more. It needs to be a true procurement. It needs to be a procurement in substance, not just form, if that makes sense. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention early on, we did have 3 staff members who worked very tirelessly and very hard on this report. We really very much appreciate the work that they did. This was a challenging audit in a lot of different ways, but we really appreciate what they did and the noise with it and whatnot. But that's all we have at this point, and thank you for listening, thank you for your attention, and, I'm sorry.
So one thing we did want to point out about this audit that's a little bit different than others is that if you look at the matrix, it's blank. Most of our matrices, when we have recommendations, they have action plans and acceptance. In this instance, since Dr. Coleman is newer and doesn't necessarily know the processes as well and wants to take that time to really understand it before putting something down as far as what their action plans will be, she has indicated that all of them will be accepted, but working with the commissioners as well as the individuals that work in arts to figure out the best ways to address these. So this is a little bit different that you see that it is blank, but that is the next step since the commission, we didn't present to the commission yet because we wanted to present to you all first.
And there will be a follow-up.
Yes, the plan is for us to do because we limited some of this that's even in the report because we were trying to put together a report that addressed so many high risks. That there were some other smaller things that we also noticed, but weren't necessarily, a lot of them would get fixed if these high-risk areas got addressed. But so the plan is not just a follow-up, but within a few years, once things have been up and running, to do another full audit. So that we can make sure that the processes truly are working and that they are addressing all of these risks and even other risks that we didn't have the time to necessarily vet or look at.
So, go ahead. I wanted to connect some dots here operationally and what's in this matrix versus where we've been, and particularly connect these dots for Vice Mayor Henderson and Councilmember Allen. When we look at the progression of this, we mentioned earlier in the fall, we started seeing these flags raised, and we started to handle those as if they were raised. One of those was a referral here, and you can see what these results have brought. I want to say a very big thank you to Lauren and her team for alerting us by January that, hey, these books and records are even worse than maybe you thought. It's going to take us a while to get through it. You need to be thinking operationally how you're going to manage this budget year. So as we got into that early part of really the winter time, the January, February time frame, it was pretty clear from what we could see that this was going over budget. We could tell there was still a lot to be entered into the system. Invoices that were sitting around hadn't been entered to make that worse. We later learned about honeybees, some of the liabilities that could be there and so forth. So when you guys heard me say at some point we're headed towards a loss, we need some intervention, you can see why. So by the time March or so gets here, it's time for us to look at the budget year where we're headed to. And as you well know from your council actions, there were some provisions for the general government surplus where we could look down and see that the commitments of the Arts Commission were far greater than their budget to pay that. We were able to move some money into a specialized account, which our law department manages for us, and I won't take any more time. I know we got a lot more on the agenda here to explain that, but what we've been able to accomplish with that type of movement and frankly the leadership out of our law department is this, is we took the control of the books and records to try and get these corrected, as we revoked the purchasing privileges and started to make sure we wouldn't have any other violations here. The law department was very busy taking the commitments that we could find and getting those paid. And so through the course of the last several weeks, I'm thrilled to tell you that as of today, they have successfully been able to pay 66 of 75 grant awards that were not budgeted. That's about 94% of that total value. Of the Thrive Awards, 80 of 94. That's about 86% of that value. The exceptions that we're trying to work through are more or less a function of the books and records that are challenging for us to read. Our hats are off to the folks that are at the Arts Commission today, Director Coleman, others that are helping trying to track down the exceptions, but it's been a very effective program. It's been a costly program, but it is bringing to a conclusion, I think, for many of the artists that feel like they were promised something that they maybe were not going to get. Those things are being received. These books and records are coming into balance. We're starting to look at the employment issues and work with our partners at HR and law to bring this to a good conclusion. So I am hopeful here in the weeks ahead that we're going to have, a very good start to this fiscal year. Hopefully put this last year behind us. And as Lauren mentioned, we'll be looking at an audit here in another, some period of time, year or two later. And hopefully by that time, all of these recommendations will be cleared and arts will be clean and functioning well.
Dr. Coleman, I just wanted to thank you for taking on, can barely see you over this whole thank you for taking on what you're taking on with the Arts Commission. I know I really appreciate it, and I know it'll be a lot of work. But I did have one question about whether you feel like this audit sufficiently paints the picture for you about the difference between folks just not understanding what the rules were and people intentionally circumventing those rules. Like, do you feel like you have a good roadmap under what's been presented?
I would say that the staff has worked hard to move forward. I think the audit has corroborated some observations that have appeared in other reports about the Arts Commission and have corroborated some of my observances after only about 5 weeks. We are working hard to remedy those, and even though finance has the major role, our staff still has to do a lot of the work in going through the records. So I think the potential is there for us to remedy, and that is our plan, those items that have been found. As has been stated, legal, finance, HR, and other departments are available to help us, but we're not the only people they're helping. So some things take longer than we would like for them to take, but overall I feel very optimistic. 15 seems like a large number for the size of our budget, but we have a lot of labor-intensive activity that goes on, particularly around public art. Many vendors, many invoices, purchase orders, and things of that nature. We have one full-time person and a part-time person who's working on that. So we're looking to see how we can configure our staff in ways that will allow us to address the need for more work in those areas. Our commission, we are working, or at least I am working on a strategy or an implementation plan for addressing those issues, but they have not been addressed by the commission, and that is going to be critical. The Budget and Oversight Committee meets on July 2nd, and the commission meets on July 18th, and this will be top of the agenda, along with other things.
If I may, Director, Ms. Riley shared with us why this does not commit to any date certain here, but given your upcoming commission meeting, will this team at Audit be presenting this additionally to your commission? Okay, great. And then do you feel subsequent to that with some additional internal work, do you have sort of a horizon, or maybe like a month from now, you might take the typical matrix and determine, when we'll set they're proposed completion dates.
Right.
But do you have kind of a time frame in mind for that?
Well, I don't want to be overly ambitious because there are many, many things going on, and every day there's a new crisis. There were 3 today that impact our ability to communicate. So I would say we're going to need several months, and I can't be any more specific than that. I hope this does not drag on till December or something like that, but until we begin to get into it and have some guidance from the commission, we will be happy to report back as soon as we know and have a plan worked out. We're not trying to avoid it. I just don't want to give you a date and then we don't meet it.
Understood, and I wouldn't expect that. I know we meet again in September, and obviously the director can communicate with us in the interim time, but I think that's, okay, I appreciate that.
Anything else?
Thank you for taking this on. It's a big role. And
I know.
we appreciate you.
Somebody said, I don't know if I need congratulations or condolences.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And I just want to go on record as thanking all the people who have stepped up to make sure that all the artists who, in good faith, went and made the applications and have patiently waited, and I think everyone is working really hard to ensure a good outcome, and I'm just grateful for all the hard work that's gone into that, so, for everybody. Good job.
No motion.
Y'all act like there's other business still.
I know, there's still a lengthy agenda. You ready for the next one?
Yep.
Okay, our next audit that we have is the audit of criminal justice planning. So criminal justice planning is a very small department of 4 people that was created in 1995 to have independent oversight or monitoring of jail populations due to a lawsuit that happened related to jail overcrowding in jail populations. We did this audit because we haven't been there in a while, but then also we did put some smaller audits on the audit plan as we had some newer auditors, and so this was an opportunity for one of our newer auditors to do their first project. We ended up with 4 objectives related to this audit. The first one was related to stakeholders and whether or not their needs were being met and they were getting the reports and information that they needed, and that was yes. The second objective that we had was if the governance in place was independent and effective, and that was generally no. The third objective was related to whether the reports that they are sending out to the stakeholders are timely, accurate, and that there's processes in place to make sure of that. That was generally yes. And then the last one was controls and processes around the data that they work with and making sure that it's authorized, and that was generally no. So with this audit, we had 6 observations and 10 recommendations. All were accepted by management, and in fact, many of them have already been implemented or they're working towards implementation already. Real high level what those observations were. The first one was about evaluating the mission. As I mentioned, this was set up for jail overcrowding due to a lawsuit many years ago. That has not been an issue in about 20-plus years. And so, though it is something that is important to continue monitoring, maybe evaluating the mission of the department to make sure that it is fitting a need that has, as I guess the department and criminal justice system have evolved, are there other opportunities for this department to add value? The second one was related to data access. So the department pulls queries from databases, and so in that instance, we would think that everybody should have read-only access because there's no need to manipulate the underlying information. We found one instance where both a former employee and the current staff had access that was not just read-only. So we would want to get rid of that and have just read-only. Additionally, we did find an employee that had access to 2 of the databases still even after leaving, so that there's a process that needs to be in place to make sure that they don't have access anymore. And the last one was that a universal ID was being used by the department for one of the databases. We don't like to see that because then we don't know who is doing what, and so you want to have unique IDs. The next observation related to quality assurance. With a small department, a lot of times one person is doing everything within their job duties, and so we would have individuals who would be running queries, and they would run the query, they would export the information, and in that instance, that makes the information that they have manipulatable. And so whether it's intentional or accidental, it could happen. And so having somebody check the work, whether it's just control totals or a random basis where you're checking those reports, that's important to have. Additionally, many of these queries were set up years ago, and there's not a process to check with the database owners to make sure that the information in that query is still applicable. Have changes been made to the database where there's new classifications, columns, anything like that in the data, just to make sure that that information's up to date. There was only one database where there may have been changes, but it was too complex for our team to look at, and so we did make the recommendation that they work with the database owner to make sure that that's accurate. The next one related to governance. So the way that criminal justice planning is set up is you have criminal justice planning, who is overseen by the advisory board. This advisory board is made up of 8 individuals within the criminal justice system, and per legislation, they are to meet quarterly. Then above them, which is just the advisory board plus the chair of the public health committee and the mayor, along with the 8 other members, so 10 total members, there is the oversight committee. Per legislation, they are to meet.
Pardon, the chair of the public
Of
health
the Public Health and Safety Committee.
of the council?
Yes.
Okay.
And so they are to, per legislation, meet monthly, which is a little bit backwards if you think about that, where normally the lower level oversight meets more often because things bubble up to the upper oversight. So that in itself is a little bit backwards, but then also we did check to see if they were meeting per their requirements. The oversight committee, which should be meeting monthly, met 1 out of 26 months. The advisory board, which was supposed to be meeting quarterly, met 4 out of 9 quarters. Talking and doing a survey of stakeholders, some of them did mention that agendas and meetings were not always necessary. And so working with those 2 groups to determine what is necessary for the correct oversight of that department and updating the legislation to properly reflect that. We did have minutes and agendas and everything was taken at those meetings. It's just that they're not necessarily being held like they should. And so it does make you wonder about the oversight of the actual department. But I will say also that the director reports up to the chair of the advisory board, who right now is our district attorney. They did meet. There was discussions between them. There was, performance evaluations of the director. So that was happening. It just was not happening in committee. The next one that we had was related to, I remember, leveraging technology. So every report, whether it is daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual, that they create is emailed out. And it's emailed to the distribution list that they have. As technology has evolved, and with people getting more and more emails, it makes there possibly be an opportunity to utilize something that's much more interactive and accessible, whether that's a Tableau dashboard, as JIS, who manages the databases that they use, has started to use, or the mayor's office is also using Tableau. just exploring that opportunity, possibly so that people don't have to comb through emails to get information. Maybe they can go out to a dashboard or something that's easier to find. And the last one related to just independence. Since that department was set up to be independent, as well as our department is, we annually attest to our independence. We check our conflicts of interest. We make sure that we can attest that we are independent. And so we would recommend that they do the same, just so that outward-facing and transparency purposes, have your staff acknowledge that they don't see any conflicts with the information that they're dealing with or the individuals that they're dealing with. So those were our observations and recommendations. We do have with us from the Criminal Justice Planning Department, the Director, Donna Blackburn, and Samantha Taylor. So if y'all have any questions about the audit, we are happy to answer them.
So, subsequent to 1995, and is this effectively like a consent decree? Like, I mean, it's kind of like through the court's process, it's been determined by settlement that we had to stand up this department to administer this, or like, I mean, it seems that this was put in place to address kind of an acute need at the time, and then now from an independence perspective. So can you just tell me under what, obviously it's been established by code, it exists, there's certain practices that aren't being fulfilled, but I know this sounds awkward, but like, do we need this department anymore? Like,
Well, they do play an important role. They are monitoring jail populations, and as the director has pointed out before, making sure that that's monitored is very important.
Okay.
Because if you're not watching, something can happen. Admittedly, this was set up, my understanding, and Donnie, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There was.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You could come up here.
Well,
But this was part of the settlement, was set up to address part of the settlement that happened with that lawsuit, correct? The department was set up itself, is kind of part of that, with the lawsuit that happened related to overcrowding. It was part of the settlement process as far as like,
yeah,
that correct?
basically, we agree, Davidson County agreed to follow these guidelines and certain things that Metro would do, and we presented that to the federal judge, and he released us out of the federal lawsuit if we continue doing what we said we would do.
okay. And this was in perpetuity, not to achieve a certain goal within a certain time frame. It was just forever?
Well, I've been there for 20 years doing it, so I don't know what you mean by really forever, but yes. And the basic thing is if you don't keep your eyes on what you're doing, you're going to repeat your past. And so we are now providing data that Metro had never, the criminal justice system had never had, and hopefully they use this data to manage their own budgets, to see we need this, we need another courtroom, or we need that or this. So we give out pertinent information. Yes, the lawsuit has been dismissed, but it can come back if we get in the same situations.
And then I apologize, this department was established by code?
Ordinance. And ordinance. We have ordinance and executive orders. Sometimes I get confused.
Okay. And so the ordinance is where it indicates that the chair of the council's public health and safety.
that was I believe, an executive order that was later on. Because
I really don't know that. I'm sorry. I remember a lot. I do not remember why that's in there. Mayor Purcell did that. You want to go back?
So I guess just from the council side of the house and that perspective, like, right, I want to make sure my members and people I appoint to chairmanship are fulfilling their obligation.
Yeah.
Like, I knew nothing about this. So, right, so I guess I'm just trying to ascertain with some of the challenges, right, of what you talked about, like quarterly, monthly, and the obligation on a member of the body of which I'm a president. Like, I guess I'm interested. I don't see in the matrix, like, really any recommendation particular to the ordinance or the legislation that we might kind of fix that a little bit, but did I miss that?
How? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I mean, I guess whether through the executive order that I assume is still in place, but doesn't that have to be renewed with each administration, or the ordinance in particular relative to the participation of the council member chair in this advisory board and/or steering committee? Like, I guess what I want to understand as far as results of this process, like, maybe that person doesn't need to be participating or participating at the cadence. I'm just wondering if there's some updating of the legislation that might be needed.
It does, D1 does it, it's broad, but
Okay.
D1 does, say to determine reasonable meeting requirements and update underlying legislation.
Thank you, update underline, I missed that, I apologize. Update underlying
I think it's the
legislation.
determination of if they came together and said, we need to meet this much, we just haven't been, then you wouldn't necessarily need to update it, but it is to, once the committee or the board gets together to make that understanding and determination, then, or, I don't know.
Okay, but I'm seeing agreement, changed advisory board to quarterly and informed mayor, this mayor, Mayor O'Connell?
Inform the mayor about the quarterly meetings or something else?
It says the steering committee, the mayor was informed on the steering committee meetings in your response.
Okay, this is complicated. Back when we started, yes, we needed to meet monthly with the mayor to hear what was going on. Federal lawsuit was there. Bill Purcell will tell you that the first thing that happened to him was he had to go in front of a federal judge as mayor to say, why are y'all not following my order? So at the time, monthly meetings with the steering committee was real important. We came to the conclusion sometime in there that we needed an advisory board because sitting at the table with the mayor, we weren't getting anything done. So we needed more of a working committee that we could do things, address our problems, and take it back to the mayor to say, these are the accomplishments, these are the things going on. They do have it, it does not need to meet monthly anymore. So that does need to be changed.
And that is presently in an ordinance that you meet monthly, or that's in the
That's an
executive order?
executive order, I think.
So if you told the mayor, he needs
I'm
to
sorry, I get them confused.
Yeah, an executive order is just an action of the mayor.
Yeah, I know, and
whereas the
each
order-
mayor does it, signs off on them.
He upped it.
The
Yeah.
former mayor, Mayor Cooper, had no interest in ever meeting with us. And we had a representative from his office that left at some point, I don't know when, but he was the one that would try to set up the meetings with Mayor Cooper. And Mayor Cooper just wouldn't, politically, I don't know what to say to you besides he had no interest in us. And so he wouldn't meet. He would not follow his own order that, I'm sure he didn't really understand everything.
No, I apologize. So Mayor Cooper renewed this executive order.
Yeah, I'm sure yes, he did.
We know that for sure. Okay. Do we know if Mayor O'Connell renewed this executive order?
He has, and what I'm
Okay.
trying to do is work with Kristen to change it from.
Ms. Wilson, Kristen Wilson?
Yes, to change it from monthly to quarterly,
by an executive order.
or as needed, I'm sorry.
And that would happen by an executive order, so I
Yes.
guess we just need to check. Okay,
Yes.
Great.
And then by ordinance is the quarterly of the,
Some of this was set up before I really started in the position, so I would
guess-
need to see him. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
No,
which
I
is
appreciate
which.
it. I think I just, in my admittedly kind of cursory first glance here, because I did not see a recommendation particular to council, and then I registered this as completed in our matrix, colleagues. I didn't really kind of clock this as something that we maybe need to think about on the council side of things. So just to kind of put on the record, I will address it with
Okay.
legal counsel and just touch base with Ms. Wilson in the mayor's office and just make sure we're doing everything we're supposed to do, but also recognizing that we maybe don't need to keep doing all the things that we're,
Supposed to do.
right. So
Well,
we'll be in touch, yeah.
you better not do away with the department.
No,
Go back to doing this
I'm not
system.
suggesting that's
Okay.
what's happening. I'm thinking more particular to, again, a member of my body
I
in the role of
understand.
chairmanship.
Now,
having-
finance was
yeah.
real important because we were making a lot of financial decisions within Metro that they had to fund, and that was why that person was there. The other one is this public safety and health. It's just probably because of the name public safety.
Right.
For them to know at that time what we were trying to do to get out of the lawsuit.
Right.
And what was going on with crime in Davidson County.
Okay, okay,
So
thank
that
you
was
so
it.
much. I appreciate the
I'm sorry, I didn't,
clarifications. Oh, there's no
I'm
need to
confusing you
apologize.
too,
Yeah.
so I apologize.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Okay, next, we have sidewalk prioritization, and Seth Hatfield will be going through that audit with us.
All right, yeah, so we have the audit of NDOT sidewalks prioritization. I just want to recognize Auditor Mary Cole, who did all the work on this audit. We appreciate her work. And also here tonight, we have Director Diana Alarcon and Deputy Director Brad Fries. Brad was our audit contact for this. He went above and beyond getting us information, helping us. We appreciate his work on this. The audit was released last month. So the scope of the audit was sidewalk prioritization activity during calendar years 2021 and 2022. Didn't get into like engineering, construction. It was purely how do we prioritize sidewalks in Metro Nashville. So we broke it into 3 objectives. We had the methodology in place to prioritize new sidewalk construction projects, the methodology in place to repair and maintain existing sidewalks, and then we also looked at communication regarding sidewalk prioritization between NDOT and both the community and also the Metro Nashville Council. So our first objective question was, does NDOT have a sidewalk prioritization methodology for new sidewalk construction that effectively and efficiently addresses public safety, accessibility, and equity concerns? Answer for that was generally yes. Second objective question, does NDOT have a methodology for the effective and efficient repair and maintenance of sidewalks? Generally yes. And finally, is there an effective communication between regarding sidewalk prioritization between NDOT and the public, and also the Metro Nashville Council? And we had generally no for that objective. Basically, the testing under those 3 objectives led us to 5 observations and 11 recommendations. So I'll just kind of briefly go through the observations and the recommendations, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions along the way. The first observation was in regards to sidewalk repairs and maintenance. So we did a sample of repairs that were completed during the audit period. I looked at 24, and we found 6 out of 24 were not completed timely, took longer than 9 months. So we got that, if you're wondering where that 9 months came from, we used kind of professional judgment, also looking at other cities, seeing what did they kind of publicize or trying to complete repairs under. So we kind of just came to that 9 months because we kind of had to make a decision on that. Obviously, if you don't repair sidewalks quickly, it can have a negative impact on public safety and accessibility. So our recommendations there were to just maybe publicize a goal time frame of when NDOT is going to be committed to completing sidewalk repairs. Make sure that you have procedures in place to make sure the repairs are done timely. So that's basically that observation. Observation B, sidewalk prioritization, public communication. If you look at pages 7 and 8 of the report, we have the survey results we did. So the population for the Nashville community were Hub Nashville requests. So individuals that submitted sidewalk-related repairs or asked for new sidewalks, that was who we sent the survey to. It's about 700, we got 350 back.
Out the survey.
I'm sorry?
I think I filled out the survey.
You got it in your inbox.
You can look at the results of the survey, but we felt that it showed that maybe communication could be improved. Regarding the public, I mean, NDOT puts out a ton of information about sidewalks. You got the sidewalk project sphere, you have the walk and bike plan, you have several plans out there. But it's a lot of information. I mean, the 2017 plan was over 200 pages, the 2022 plan's over 60. So it could be that, the public doesn't really know where to go to find the information they need about sidewalks. So the recommendation there is, maybe find a way to publicize or consolidate information that makes it more digestible. For the council, we have some newer council members that started in September, so make sure that they're aware of the sidewalk prioritization, communicate the sidewalk prioritization methodology to them, make sure that NDOT has a council liaison, so make sure everybody knows that contact information, make sure they know how, if they have sidewalk concerns or their constituents do, make sure they know how to communicate that to the department. So that's observation B and our recommendations there.
It's a low response rate from council, but I would say that was campaign summer.
Yeah.
I'm like, did I answer this survey? Yeah.
So first, observation C, sidewalk prioritization. So we got a list from NDOT of all the completed projects. I think there was 37, 38, and we looked at 4 of those. Looked at how those were prioritized. So the walk and bike plan has criteria in place to objectively score sidewalks, to make sure that they're being prioritized in an objective way. So 3 out of 4 of those were prioritized. The one that wasn't it was just an opportunity because Metro Water was doing some work. It was one of those where they could work together, and since everything was getting tore up, they could put in a sidewalk at the same time. So that was reasonable.
That should definitely be a priority.
Yeah. So,
coordination with other infrastructure is a good thing. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So one thing we found though is supporting, while there's criteria in place, we kind of wanted to see supporting documentation for the score. We have the score, but it'd be nice to know like when the score was done, which individuals did the score. Like if a sidewalk got 25 out of 25 points for safety because of the number of incidents on that road, like where's the documentation showing what the exact number of incidents were compared to maybe a sidewalk that got a score of 15 because of the incidents, just to make sure that everything's consistent. So you could do that, and maybe in future scorings have a scoring sheet that's just filled out with all that pertinent information. Also, sidewalk construction projects can be in the pipeline for several years. One of the projects in our sample, I think, was prioritized back in 2008 under different criteria. So the walk and bike plan lists all the new projects that were scored, but doesn't include those backlogged, even though they're on the sidewalk project viewer. Just for transparency, maybe in future walk and bike plans, just have all the projects that are outstanding, the ones in the backlog, just so those are available. So that is our the recommendations there. Sidewalk program success measurement. Whenever we audit a program, we're going to ask, how do you know your program is succeeding? So obviously we asked those questions in this audit. At the time, it was under former Mayor Cooper's building sidewalks 50% faster with 20% reduced costs. And so that's kind of the measurement that they were going with at the time. So that's what we audited. They put out, in conjunction with the mayor's office, they put out kind of progress reports, peer sheets about showing pertinent information about how they were doing. But when we compared those sheets, we saw conflicting information, not necessarily errors, but when each report was pulled, they would pull information, data in a different way, so it wasn't easily comparable. So the recommendation there is, there's a couple of recommendations. One, where we have a new mayor, decide, kind of work with the new administration, see what does success look like for sidewalks moving forward if we're not going to go with the 50% faster, or 50%, faster, 20% reduced cost. And once you determine what your success looks like, make sure that when you put out information about it, that there's a quality assurance process in place, and just the reports can be accurate and easily compared. Last observation, just sidewalk program employee turnover and succession planning. And I think during the audit period, and even during the audit itself, we saw employee turnover. These sidewalk projects can take, be in the pipeline for several years. So you want to make sure you have job-specific procedures in place, so when employee turnover happens, it's not delaying the process for sidewalks. Everything keeps moving. So we had that observation as well. All in all, we had 11 recommendations. They were all accepted by management. We appreciate their work with us. Do you have any questions about the audit for me, or any questions about the program with management that's here? We'll take those now.
appreciate this work a lot. I care a lot about sidewalks, so I was glad to read this. And I was interested to see kind of some things coming through that I think council members definitely felt, and I think that was kind of given the volatility in leadership, just multiple mayors, multiple folks prior to Ms. Alarcon coming into leadership in the department. And it did start to feel like, I know Berkeley knows that I probably say this too long, but like kind of holding the through lines, like what are we doing here, you know? And so I think when you had council come in 2015, that 2017 walk and bike strategic plan, there was a lot of kind of just buy-in, participation, understanding. It was a big plan. I mean, in showing my bias, I served on the steering committee for that plan, and so I think council had a good understanding of it at the time and could speak to it, speak to our constituency, speak among membership. Like there was an understanding there. In my chairmanship of Public Works, or I guess vice chairmanship, we had 2 years an annual implementation meeting for the walk and bike strategic plan. So kind of like, what does success look like, right? Having an annual implementation meeting to see how are we delivering on what our stated goals were. And I feel like in the Cooper administration, I think that was just reflective somewhat of the time, right? Like tornado, derecho, pandemic, bombing, like all these things. I feel like we kind of had to come apart in this space where I really like, you know, the 50% faster, 20%, whatever. I think genuinely members did not know that we were updating like to a 2022, like a new plan. And we kind of had, I think I remember inviting your staff to kind of be like, and we were all just like, wait, there's a new plan? Like, I mean, genuinely, right? And so I think there was just a little bit of a disconnect in communication from the administration to council, and then because there were so many plans, the public facing, which you spoke to here, you know, sidewalk trackers, Vision Zero plan, Vision Zero implementation plan, updated walk and bike strategic plan, Connect Downtown plan. I mean, people are just like, oh my gosh, all the plans. And I think we kind of lost an ability as a body to kind of speak to, and speaking from a council perspective, what are we doing? What's changed? What are the goals? And so I think we just lost those through lines. And I think you see that reflected here, and I appreciate the department's responses to these. And so, you know, thank you for the work.
Other questions, comments?
If I may. As to the repair process, I don't know, Director Alarcon, if you could speak to, I know that from a budgetary perspective, we have brought some things in-house with the operational budget, and that is kind of, you know, striping down crosswalks and doing some of those things that citizens do expect a kind of a quick return on that we previously were kind of contracting, and so it was somewhat cumbersome. Can you speak to kind of where the sidewalk repair work fits in that continuum of contracted versus internal delivery?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Diana Alarcon, Director over the Department of Transportation and Multimodal Infrastructure, otherwise known as NDOT. Trying to keep it simple. So we actually receive the need for sidewalk repair 2 different ways. One is through our legal department. If we have an unfortunate lawsuit, that is actually sent over to us. The team actually goes out and investigates that, makes a determination if it is truly a trip hazard, a public safety issue. If it is, that is something that we will actually fix internally immediately. If we get a request that comes in through Hub Nashville, which we get quite a few of those in, we will actually do an evaluation. We will send the team out. We will have them do an evaluation to determine if it is a public safety issue or if maybe it's something we need to add that will become part of the next round of the update to the walk and bike plan. So it just really depends. If it's determined it's a public safety issue, then it gets sent back over to our maintenance department where another evaluation is done. If our team is overwhelmed, they cannot do it, we will actually contract a vendor or a contractor contractor that we work with on our sidewalks to actually go out and get the repair done. So that is something that we do because we want to make sure that we are fixing the safety hazards out there as quickly as possible. And then if it's really more about filling a gap or adding a sidewalk, but it's not creating a public safety, but, you know, in my mind, someone having to walk in a street is a public safety issue, but I may have to think about adding in drainage and other stormwater issues, so that becomes a bigger conversation that we have with other departments of what they're doing, and that's where we find that we will be able to do some partnership because maybe water has a project, so there's a constant conversation going on there. But those are typically the process. We have drafted SOPs that are part of our process, so everybody's very aware how to follow that now, so we've been able to do that. And, you know, that was part of, you know, a new department, getting it all structured. We got SOPs in place so that folks knew exactly what to do and what was expected of everybody.
Standard operating procedure for the general public, right?
Sorry about that,
Our government
yes.
acronyms, right? Yeah. So I guess to the audit staff's question of kind of, you know, like, what does success look like? I know for potholes, it's like, you know, 48 hours, right? Like, and we do a great job in that regard. I know sidewalk repairs, you know, there's a big spectrum of what that is. There's like patch up this concrete, and then there's also like, oh, this is like a structural kind of, so
And
can you speak to that?
we are, in our strategic plan, we actually identified where we want to start making improvements of over 10% from year over year on actually being able to get them done.
Okay.
And so that's the goal we're working toward. And so, you know, it was mentioned that in some cases it took 9 months, and I would say most of those 9 months cases are because we're working with other departments to get it done, or maybe we have to work with other utility companies in order to get it improved, because sometimes you can't just throw a sidewalk down on top of utility. So if there's a utility there that caused the issue to be broken or whatever, we have to work through that department, and that doesn't always happen very quickly. But our goal is to consistently see a 10% reduction. If it's a public safety issue, we're trying to get out there pretty quickly and get it done. Keep in mind, we're laying concrete. It takes time for it to cure. So right now, we're actually handling a majority of that. I'd say, what, in about 6 weeks, Brad?
Actually less.
Less.
30 days is our average.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's great. And then, colleagues, does anybody else have a question? I do have one more question, Chair. For sidewalk gaps and sort of gaps funding, and I know that's been bucketed in different ways over time, and so there were sort of like repairs and gaps of a certain distance, and certainly understanding from a capital project prioritization, right? Like proximity to transit, adjacency to school, on a major arterial, like those kind of decision trees that I know also affect gaps, but also sort of the gap in and of itself is a bit of a bump in the scoring, right? And so we saw sometimes through our sidewalk requirements at the time, kind of creating that daisy chain effect of, you know, now you have an adjacency, now you're requiring more sidewalks, and then, oh, you get on down here, and like, oh, there's just this one gap here, right? And thought being that from a prioritization perspective, from a capital investment, that would bump that up the list, but I knew it went to scale, right? So, like, what is a gap? Do you have that defined, or do you kind of know it when you see it? Like, is there a distance up to which you can kind of manage and handle internally if there's a certain simplicity in it, if it's not a whole big, you know, stormwater massive issue? Can you just speak to how you address the gaps at this juncture? And how
So
that
I would say in the actual way of prioritizing for the 2022 plan for walk bike, gaps were considered so that we would have connectivity.
Right.
And that was built into that. Now, we've worked in a 3-year plan where every year we have a plan. I will share with you that though we have been funded, we're not done with our 3-year plan, and it's time to update the plan again. So we actually are out doing what we're calling access management right now of every single facility that we have that's going to identify the gaps. And this is also part of our multimodal master planning that we're working on with both WeGo and planning. And that's looking at everything, and we're not starting from scratch. We're taking all the plans, we're throwing them in the kitchen sink, and we're going to layer them over top of each other, and we're hoping that'll help us identify some of the gaps, but it also identify the repetitiveness, or maybe where we need to change how we are planning something because the landscape of our community has changed so dramatically over the past years, and we'll be taking that and using that and prioritizing the gaps. So if it is related to safe schools, which is part of our Vision Zero effort, that's going to have a prioritization. If it's related to a park, that'll have a prioritization. If it's a small gap that we can go in and fill in pretty quickly, we'll actually go in and do that. So some of it, if we can do it internally, we will just go and do it. If it is going to take something a little bit more, such as we have to do some drainage improvements, work with storm water, or if there is some utilities that need to be relocated, those most likely are going to fall in under a different type of, it'll be prioritized that way, but then it gets into feasibility. So we do want to try to make connectivity very important, and that was a measurement in the prioritization, so that's where your gaps come into play.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is our last audit, which is the farmer's market, and Seth will also be presenting that one.
All right, so we have the audit of the Nashville Farmers Market. I want to recognize our auditor, Jim Carson, who did all the work on this. We appreciate his work. And then we have Director Daryl Lane here and Finance Manager David Griffin. This audit was also released last month. The scope was fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. We had 3 audit objectives. Does the Nashville Farmers Market effectively manage leases and vendor payments? That was generally yes. Are vendors at the Nashville Farmers Market satisfied with the facilities and services provided by market management? Also generally yes. And then is the Nashville Farmers Market Board actively engaged in providing governance to the Nashville Farmers Market? And that was yes. The work under this, the testing we did under these objectives led to 5 observations and 7 recommendations. I'll just briefly go through the observations. So observation A, segregation of duties. At the time of the audit, it's a very small staff, so we had the finance manager that was collecting payments, monitoring payments, doing the deposits, recording the payments. Obviously, for typical internal controls, you try to segregate those duties just to eliminate opportunities for fraud or mistakes, just general mistakes. So our recommendation there is obviously to try to segregate those duties or implement compensating controls. So during the audit, when we brought that to their attention, they immediately got to work and put some controls in place to circumvent the lack of segregation of duties. Second observation was emergency and disaster planning. Part of the survey that we did, we got some feedback from vendors that said that they didn't have a documented emergency or disaster plan, and so even though the current management, they have taken steps to improve safety. They have instant messaging for all the vendors. If there's a disaster, emergency, they can get in touch with all the vendors instantly. They've done active shooter training, things like that. But just having that documented emergency or disaster plan is important to have the vendors and employees, so we recommended that. Observation C, revenue deposits and recording. During the time of the audit, they didn't have a payment log or a check log that they recorded when their payments came in. So it was hard for us to determine the timeliness of deposits. So we recommended they get that, a system in place to record those. Also, you have vendor payments that it's kind of important that those come in on time. If they don't, they can get late fees. So you don't want to miss out on revenue. So that's another thing that you want to have the backup, in case the late fees do get assessed. Also, there was about 39% of the payments were not being recorded within 2 business days of deposit, which is a finance policy. So our recommendation there was to ensure that was happening. I will say all those payments were before Mr. Lane became the director. So when him and David started, we didn't have any issues with the timeliness of recording. So it was just that happened during the audit period. Observation D, lease management. So we did review 13 leases. We found 5 of those leases did not go through the proper vetting, so they weren't reviewed by legal, they weren't approved by the board. It was basically executed by just the vendor and the director at the time. Again, these are leases that were before Mr. Lane's time. We also found where the rent escalation clauses were not executed timely, so there was some revenue that was lost because of that. And so since Mr. Lane started, all the leases have gone through the proper approval process, so it's just that happened during the audit scope. Finally, just retention of meeting minutes. During the pandemic, for the third observation about governance, we went back and reviewed all the meeting minutes, and basically all the virtual meetings during the pandemic did not have minutes, so we couldn't review those. So again, prior management, but the recommendation there obviously is make sure that each meeting, public meeting, has drafted minutes that are approved. It should be noted that if we started the audit scope when current management started, you basically only have the first 2 observations. So just because of the audit scope, we put the other ones in. But they're, from our perspective, they're doing a pretty good job at managing payments and leases and all that. So I want to give them kudos because they've been here for 2 hours sitting here.
I feel like when we look at the agenda, we should give like an anticipated time or something on there, you know.
But if you have any questions about the audit or for the management, take
Think how
those.
much they learned about arts and criminal justice. It's the service that we provide as a metro government.
I hope you enjoyed your time here.
Like a caveat, like that arts one's gonna take a while. I guess I just had a quick question about the board and commission meetings and what happened in the pandemic and those being online or not, and from our perspective, kind of like best practices. Because I know this question comes up just generally as far as like boards and commissions, because we have 60 or 70 of them. They can't all be recorded and televised, and so I kind of wonder over time, you know, we have pretty detailed minutes that we accept and approve. Different boards and commissions, they're less detailed. People come to just rely, like you have a recording, kind of why do you have minutes? And I just didn't know from the auditor's perspective or our department, like what do we say is Metro is best practice? If you're having an online meeting, is the meeting the notes, or is it, can you speak to that?
Our best practice
Yeah.
would be that you still have those meetings, because we've even encountered it before where the recording gets corrupted. And if it's not live streamed or something like that, there are instances where it happens where they don't get recorded. It's very rare now, but that is your record, is those minutes. And many times the bylaws require minutes for all these different boards and commissions. The depth of them varies, as you mentioned.
Right, I mean, they're just all over the place.
Yes, we tend to be more detailed sometimes than a lot of others, but at the same time, it's because we do want to have certain things on record, especially with public officials that are making statements. So we would always recommend that there are documented minutes, even if it is recorded, even if you know that it was recorded, because that document will likely outlive that recording, if you need it.
Yeah, if I may, just like when you were asking me to speak up earlier,
Yeah.
you know, depending on the meeting room you're in, you may have a microphone, you may not.
Right.
You certainly don't feel like you're shouting at anybody, but you don't want to whisper either.
Right. Yeah.
So she's right. I've had numerous instances to go back to look on what we can rely for some financial things, and found that the videos they're sometimes challenged, and it has nothing to do with our equipment, everything to do with where we are. So the written word is great.
Yeah, no, and
I can add? Yeah. So there are some minimum legal requirements for minutes in state law as
Okay.
well. And so it's for like bodies that are subject to open meetings. So like you said, that can vary very much, but like generally any of my boards or commissions that aren't televised do audio record their meetings.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So I assume per state law, any vote that's taken, all those things kind of have to be documented, and then it's sort of,
It's sort of the bare minimum, really.
right, yeah.
But most people put more detail in that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seth, thank you for the hard work.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would get really old too.
Oh,
Okay. Next, we have have the external auditors who will go over the external audit plan for the next fiscal year, so Crossland, and they have passed out their handout.
Never been more happy to be right now.
I know, like,
This is Katie Ferris. I don't know if y'all have met her. She's been on engagement. She's a director on engagement. I normally would not offer this, but for the sake of time, since this is planning, you have the presentation in front of you. I'm prepared and typically will go through every page of this. If you want to save time and just you ask questions, that's fine, or I can get going with the presentation. Kind of up to you. If this was at the end of the audit, I wouldn't offer this. But since it's just the plan, there's nothing out of the ordinary with our plan this year, but I'd be happy to go through it with you, or trying to be cognizant of time.
Yeah, I
But
think being expeditious is great because you guys have done this a few times. Is there any one or two things in the plan though that you just draw attention to, or is it garden variety? And
It's pretty garden variety. I will say we started the interim already. We're in the middle of our risk assessment right now. That's generally why we don't present at this planning phase what the risk is, because we're in the middle of determining that. But that will determine our substantive procedures. Our control procedures are going to stay. I mean, we'll test different things within the controls, but it will be both a control-based audit and a substantive audit as typical. In here, you have your SAS 99, the fraud procedures that we're going to do. This is a very high level, thousands of hours of work into 15 pages. It's difficult to do. We could present a plan that would last 3 days standing here, but nothing, pretty garden variety. The new issuance, the new statements, GASB 100 through 103, only one of them's applicable to this year, and it's really just a disclosure item. So nothing out of the ordinary. But I'd be happy to get more depth.
Can you speak to the single audit and the programs there that you're going to be looking at?
Yep. So Metro does qualify as a low-risk auditee again, so we'll, that requires us to test at least 20% of the total federal expenditures. And then the programs that we test are based on whether they're type A or type B. That type A threshold for Metro is 3 million, and then whether or not they're high-risk programs. The programs listed, there's 4. Those are based on programs we have not audited in the last 2 years, plus what's designated as higher risk in the OMB compliance supplement.
So those are the 4 we've identified right now. Obviously, there could be more.
Yeah.
Just once we start our testing later in the year. This compliance testing will be done in late fall, early winter. So sometimes we come up with another program that needs to be tested that's high risk.
So on the single audits, like coronavirus, disaster recovery grants, and so when you say OMB, you mean like Federal Office of Management and Budget, because based in other cities, understanding that there has been some, not particular to us, but some problems or some fraud potentially with those programs, just because it was so much cash and so few amounts.
These grants are being given out across the country.
Got it.
And I think those 2 particular have been designated as higher risk for the last at least 3 years, I think.
Right, okay, I appreciate that. And Chair, one follow-up question if I may. So at the back of the book as to deliverables.
Yes.
The particular deliverables, are those then aligned with some significant deficiencies in prior years? So like a significant deficiency in a prior year was for MNPS, Metro Nashville Public Schools, their grants, receivables, and expenditures. And thus, based on that prior deficiency, that's why we have a deliverable this year particular to MNPS, or that's always among the deliverables?
That's always among the deliverables. The
Okay.
MNPS internal school funds, that audit is required by the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
It's a separate audit that's done, and we issue separate financials for that.
Okay.
See the second to bottom one, management ladder, that's where we reported your significant deficiency on the schools. And if hopefully we won't have one for that same one again this year.
Okay,
People are pretty receptive to clearing comments.
okay.
But whatever we do find in the audit, that's where that will be presented.
Okay, got it. So everything that's here among a deliverable, this is as required by state
Correct.
law, federal law, Metro?
All the above.
Okay,
Correct.
all those things. And so it's not particular to any prior deficiency or weakness or?
Yeah,
okay.
those are the same deliverables we have every year.
Got it. I appreciate that. First year here, so I appreciate it.
I think the council office probably needs a little extra attention this year. I'm just teasing.
No comment.
No
Okay.
comment.
I want to remind y'all, we're available all year. Feel free to call us anytime.
Yeah, I will say to my fellow department heads who've regularly asked after they've been here, does your department ever get audited? Every year. Every year.
Literally every year.
They're in residence, they're here, we try and keep them in a cold room so they don't stay as long, but thank you for what you guys do. You do a great job for us, and we really
Thank you also for being here so long as well.
Well, we need to hear this stuff, so we usually stay the whole time anyway, so don't worry.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us all day.
Thank you.
Now that you've worn us down,
Yes, exactly.
I think I'm beginning to understand
Yeah.
the reason for this law.
Exactly.
Right. Performance
Yes,
review
exactly.
fast, right?
Now to the awkward portion of the meeting. As we talked about last time, we do a 360 review for my position. Teresa, I believe, sent out the assessments to you all included in this, and included with that, I believe, was my self-assessment. Bill's not here to go over the staff results, but it was
I didn't look at your self-assessment.
Okay, well, I think that was presented, I sent, there, it's in the book at least. And then Bill sent out an anonymous survey to our staff so that they could feel comfortable responding. It was 1 through 5, it's always been 1 through 5, but it was, the average of it was 4.6 for each of the categories. And then I'll turn it over to Teresa if she wants to go through the others.
Sure. So the ones that the audit committee members filled out, even though I think I joked last year I'm the least qualified person to do math in this room, I added them up both by question and then got an overall average. So do you want the question totals, the per question totals, or you just want the overall average?
Well, I do think it's important to clarify, while your staff did it on a scale of 1 to 5, we were on a scale of 1 to 3.
Yes. 1 to 3.
Let's say that
This took a dive.
So the 1 to 3 metric, the overall average was 2.5.
Okay, got it.
2.5.
Out of 3. Okay.
just offer a comment and perspective, because we have a similar system with our department and throughout the metro government. These are great scores. I mean, these are really great scores. And it's interesting to me when I watch somebody new to a department take over, the scores are higher because maybe an expectation is lower. And as you get into groove, a great leader has, expectation becomes the norm, right? So seeing, 2+ on these are really good scores, right? They tend to really hover around too, the way we do our system. Our department's actually gone to the new electronic system coming through Oracle, and it's got, some nuances and some glitches, the first thing, but it's really, really working well. These are great scores, not only from us, but from your staff as well. I mean, I'm envious. These are great.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So this plays into, annually, you all, so Metro Council, with the approval of the budget, approved a 4% COLA, which is automatically applied to my salary as part of my employment letter. And then there's a 3% merit. Admittedly, technically, directors can get 0 to 15%. We historically have asked for only whatever the merit is at max, because anything more than that comes out of our budget, and there are much better uses for that than salary. So historically, it has been if this is just what we've done the past few years, if the committee agrees on, normally it is the average of our staff merit. We have, this year, our staff merit increases will average about 2.8. There's anywhere from 1.5% up to 4% for their performance evaluations. So we do go above the 4% or 3% because we can pull it out of the allocated amount that we're given for increases. Their average this year is 2.8.
Lauren, I just have a question. When you're coming around some of these computations, do you set aside anything for your folks who are getting new certifications or new degrees?
We do. So within our methodology, the way our methodology works is we have first off a tier where it is your performance evaluation. So every staff member gets a 1 to 3 performance evaluation in different categories, similar to this, where they get a rating. And that translates into a certain level of the merit. And then we have additional areas which you can earn additional percentages, and that one of those is for certifications that staff can get. They can get additional, it depends on the year. Sometimes it's 0.5%, sometimes it's 1%. And then anybody who gets above a certain performance evaluation score falls into a bucket of, there's usually excess funds that for salary increases that we have that we can allocate out equally amongst them to reward them for getting higher performance evaluations. And that's how you see people getting over 3% in our office.
And I want to compliment that. We have a similar system for finance, and we've done it now for a number of years, and what it leads to is very qualified people, right? And it's most impressive for folks that are younger in their careers that, they're here early as opposed to, in my case, being in a CPA firm or someplace else where that's more the norm. You just get a very qualified, very competent staff, and I think there's an upper limit as to how many initials maybe you want to put behind your name, but getting those real staples in there, it provides a nice incentive because you're compensating for it. So my hat's off to you for doing it that way.
Do I hear a motion for a percentage for the merit increase?
Oh, well, I apologize. What was the request for the motion? I didn't hear.
For the merit increase percentage.
Okay, and that is what's up to us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is what you're recommending?
I would my personal recommendation would be what we have done in the past, which is the average of the staff, which this year was 2.8%. Depending on your understanding of the scores and everything, or if there's, yes, that would be my recommendation.
I would move a 2.8%.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
And I'll also point out that I am open to feedback throughout the year. So if there is ever any feedback, that it was that is one thing that I actually strive to actually get, so that we can do better and we can improve.
Thank you for all your hard work and leadership.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I will move quickly through the remaining items since it is getting so late. Recommendation implementation. We had 24 recommendations that came up this between the last audit committee meeting in June 30th. 22 of them were reported as implemented. Once again, reported as implemented means we haven't verified them yet, but we go on and start the closing them out process so that we can get ready for follow-up audits. 2 of them requested revised dates. The first one was Metro Water, because they're still putting in new cameras at the convenience centers. They are started and they are continuing to do it. They just haven't finished that process yet. And then the second one is from procurement, who put on hold their accreditation process during the pandemic and is now starting to work to get the accreditation that we recommended years ago. It is very documentation intensive, and it has taken much more time than anticipated, but they are in the process and they do hope to get it done very soon. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Our project status. We are making our way through this audit work plan for the year. We actually have 2 more audits that are about to kick off that aren't on here yet, or that haven't been marked on here yet, and then one that we're starting to work with a consultant in about a month, to start talking about that audit. So we are on track to hopefully get this whole plan knocked out and hopefully be back asking y'all for more. We have 7 projects that are currently going on, including some follow-ups. We've issued 6 reports, and then we've got 3 draft reports that are sitting out there. We've gotten a few more allegations to our hotline. They were mostly just closed right away. The 2 open that we have are ones that y'all are aware of, so there's nothing new there. And then,
So I have a question just from a workflow standpoint. Your staff hasn't grown tremendously, but I know your workflow has, right? Not unusual. arts, for sure. I'm confident there are others that are probably taking a lot longer than originally scoped because you don't know until you get there. Realistically, is there anything on this plan right now you just feel like you're at risk for that if it weren't there, you could do a better job with the others?
I don't think so, and I'll say this because I think that we were very intentional about the plan that we put before y'all as far as thinking through our staffing and thinking through the capabilities that our staff have as well as our workload that we can handle. Additionally, we do have all these new consulting contracts in place, and we're confident in the abilities of those, which is why we've got them working on one project so far and another one that's in the pipeline. And even with that, we should have excess funds that we can even throw at additional if we need assistance on a different audit. So I think we're good right now.
And then I'm seeing 3 vacancies in
Yes.
your talent pool.
Yes.
Are those going to be filled?
Yes. So kind of moving into the budget portion, which you'll see we're significantly under budget this year, and that's for 2 reasons. It's our staffing, which we've had issues filling 2 open positions that we did have, as well as the consulting contracts that got signed later in the year. There will be a consulting invoice that hits this budget, so this will be a little bit higher, or we will spend a little bit more, but it's mostly those vacancies. And moving into the 3 vacancies, unfortunately at the beginning of June, our auditor too, Elizabeth Andrews, had some family and personal issues that happened back in Ohio where she's from, and so she unexpectedly had to move back to Ohio. And so it's best for her, but unfortunately we were very sad to lose her. We've had her for about 3 years, and she was one of the first people that we hired in as an auditor. One, because our new strategy is more to hire in people young, build them up and build them into our audit, the way that we do audits, because it also helps that we're trying to make more diverse staff, diverse thought, so we can hire people who don't have the accounting and audit background and build them up. And she was one of those instances. So that is our 3rd vacancy. We have meetings with HR next week, actually, to talk about posting that lead investigator position. Admittedly, Arts Commission audit put a lot of things on hold for our office because we threw everybody into that. So we hope to post the lead investigator position and an auditor 1 position, like right at the beginning of July. Because we can handle onboarding those 2 positions because they're different. It's hard to bring on 2 auditor 1s at once because trying to keep 2 brand new people busy on projects and everything is a little bit tougher. But with the lead investigator, hoping to have somebody come in, which we're strategizing with HR on where to post that position to get a better pool than we got the first time that we did post it.
Someone with more experience. So
Yes,
we've
that's
only
gonna,
got
yes,
the-
and that's gonna have, and that person hopefully will come in with more experience, not just in investigations, but then also like building the program and the trainings, or at least being involved in those types of trainings, because we do want to do more of those trainings across Metro.
One question on the work plan. Based on the audit experience that you've had with the Arts Commission, do you see any modifications that we should consider to the plan?
No, not because of arts. The only one that I may come back to is actually the very first audit that's on that plan, which is related to Metro Action Commission rental assistance. That program is actually really old. It's finished. It was put on the plan actually a year ago, and we pulled it forward. And admittedly, I don't think I don't think that it's necessarily going to be as impactful or timely as we had hoped. It's to a point now where I think the federal government would have audited it or looked into it, and I don't know that it's going to be as impactful. So that one may be one that we either let drop off this year, or we just come back and ask to put a different audit in its place later on.
Is that related, I apologize, was that related to COVID in particular?
Yes.
So rental assistance, so sustaining people.
Yes.
Kind of where they.
Yes, when people were laid off or
Got
they
it.
weren't able to work,
Okay.
it was for that, and it was, I believe, a couple of year program.
Okay.
But it has since ended.
Got it.
And so looking into that just isn't necessary, isn't as impactful as other stuff. now.
Okay.
Anything that we found will be so.
Yeah, okay.
Is there any action on that you want us to take today that helps you?
I don't think so, honestly, because I think you're fine to leave it on the plan. I would much rather come to you with a recommended audit to replace it.
Okay.
And that can be done later on in the year, because we have plenty of other things to work on until we get to that point. So I would think that it would be more of a trade-out.
it. We are adjourned.
No executive.
No
So
executive
make a
session.
motion to go into executive session.
Bite your tongue.
Adjourn. Gavel, you need a gavel.